Hey guys, Shama here, CEO of Scaling Retail, and here with a new episode of Retailing Weekly. Today is November 15th, and here's what's going on in the retail landscape. Interesting articles have been coming out on Business of Fashion, as well as Glossy, kind of profiling what's happening in today's retail industry. The most recent article that came out of Business of Fashion was called "4 Anxieties That Keep Fashion CEOs Awake at Night." And what I thought was so interesting about this article is it really kind of outlines a lot of the major things that CEOs are dealing with, and really how I think consumers are going to be able to capture that, right? How are they going to feed into the consumers of tomorrow? So one of those things I thought was so interesting was really the focus on sustainability and how designers are starting to think about how they can really approach and address sustainability in a way that I think consumers are going to be able to react to. You know, it's very, very expensive, as I'm sure you guys are aware, to produce products that are sustainable. So how are tomorrow's designers going to be able to address that? The next thing that they outlined was the future of artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence, I think, is such an interesting thing that's going to be taking over the retail industry. And what I think is so fascinating about artificial intelligence is that we have yet to really perfect what artificial intelligence means for retail. So we have to ask ourselves, how adept are really consumers to be able to using artificial intelligence? Now, honestly, guys, I think that consumers are really hesitant. I think we find that there are always going to be those early adopters, always going to be those people who are eager to try new products, but how that really starts to roll out in retail is going to be really interesting, especially because most retail companies are afraid of new technologies, right? A lot of new retail companies will be the last to try and implement new technologies simply because there is so much on the line and because they have so much to risk and so much to lose. So I think what we're going to start to see, my hypothesis, is we're going to start to see really the future brands of tomorrow starting to do more partnerships with different kinds of artificial intelligence companies. I think the other way to think about this is artificial intelligence can take on so many other kinds of meanings, right? Artificial intelligence can be how we do data mining, right? How we start to think about, design of product, how we start to think about use of our marketing. So AI, I think, has so many different shapes and different ways that I think it can start to take on. Now, the other point that they mentioned in this Business of Fashion article was human resources. And when I think about human resources, I think that this is one of the biggest sectors, and I'm sure most of you guys these days have been seeing the rise of like diversity departments, right? People who are really dedicated towards women's leadership, diversity, technology, right? Culture people. Now more than ever, you're seeing these job titles that didn't exist like 15 years ago, right? Director of Culture and Community inside of an office. And I think that, this article does a great job of touching on some of the issues like, sexism and like kind of sexual harassment that I think is important that we start to address within these fashion institutes. Now, the other week I gave a talk at the International Fashion Academy, and one of the questions that was asked of me was, and that was in Paris, one of the questions that was asked of me was, how do I feel about being a woman in this industry, and how do I feel about sexism and feminism and, all this kind of politicized stuff, and how does that really impact fashion and my position and really my experience. And what's really interesting is I'm lucky and happy to report that I haven't had any, from what I can understand, I'm sure things have happened maybe behind the scenes, but I haven't directly been the recipient of any of these kinds of direct sexist type of, things, in the workplace. And I think what's interesting, and I brought up the concept that I really do think there should be more female CEOs that start to lead businesses. Now, certainly there are a lot of female presidents and there are a lot of women who are in different leadership positions, but if even just to provide diversity in terms of workflow and style, and it's not simply to say that being a woman is somehow better or worse, but in an equal playing field, what does that actually mean for the businesses? What are the different ways and opportunities that we can actually impact different kinds of companies? So, I think that human resources is really an interesting thing that we have to consider, especially when we start to move up the food chain. So it's not even just females and diversity and also having, equality in these leadership roles, but really when you start to think about the boss's boss, right? Certainly we see a lot of female presidents, more and more female CEOs, But what about the people on the board of directors? What about the investors? I think that is really something that we'll have to look forward to for the next generations of business owners. And then the last thing that these guys talked about in this article was using new business models. And I think that that is extremely valuable. We've been seeing a lot of trends and things popping up in another Glossy magazine, glossy.co, if you will, their publication. They had an interview with Nadine McCarthy Kahane about, you know, how to run a business, right? And if you're trying to please everyone when you're running the business, and if you're trying to follow the rules when running a business, and how integral and important it is to really be on the forefront of running a company, right? And starting to think about these new business models. And one thing I want to reference is, you know, last week at Brand Week in Istanbul, I was listening to Tom Goodwin talk about, you know, the kind of digital age that we're in and how we are in this mid-digital age, right? We kind of lived through the pre-digital, we're in this mid-digital age, and we have yet to experience post-digital. And what he meant by that was, you know, we're now living in this place where we're basically taking, you know, catalogs and we're copying and pasting them online, and we're calling them websites, and we're calling them e-commerce platforms. But we are missing a gap right now. You know, the Gen Zs and the alphas that are starting to rise, these are the guys who we really need to start to capture, right? And these people are going to be looking for more intuitive experiences when it comes to consumer facing shopping, when it comes to brand experience, etc. So I'm gonna say, guys, that thinking about new business models is just as important of thinking about the ways you communicate the business model, right? Yes, we need to rethink supply chain. Yes, we need to rethink how we're structuring our organizations, right? Companies like Airbnb and Uber were certainly considered to be technology companies, but they really had this more empathic way of connecting to their consumers and this much bigger way of being able to solve a problem. So in this industry, in this fashion industry, when we're not actually solving a technical problem, right? What is the emotional satisfaction that we're able to deliver? And then what are the technologies that we are actually going to be able to implement to help us deliver that? Right? So the new business model simply shouldn't just come from a, here's where we were, now let's make a few quick changes and then adapt. We should really start to be thinking about this from a much bigger, more futuristic perspective, right? What can this be in an ideal scenario? What is bigger than what it is that we know right now, right? I think that's really fascinating. Other interesting things in the news that I think are worth reporting on, Lord & Taylor is to open a virtual storefront on Walmart.com. Now, this is one in a slew of other types of brand collaborations that we've been seeing. Obviously, you know, Neiman Marcus is rolling out with their kind of emerging designer platform. Obviously, Lord & Taylor in the past, they did a shop-in-shop with Bobbi Brown. You know, we're starting to see these retailers really look to expand their offerings. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would Lord & Taylor want to do something with Walmart? Right? What is in it for them? Well, certainly, right, Walmart's looking in order to increase what their actual visibility is, right? Walmart wants to be able to get in front of a more high-end customer. They want to increase and diversify their assortment. But I want to ask you guys, is Walmart really going to be able to elevate their brand? Right? Is Walmart really going to be able to increase, you know, what their presentation is and be able to get a more uplifted customer? You know, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that they're actually going to be falling down the same track as what we've been seeing with, for example, when Macy's did their collaboration with 19th Amendment. I don't know if many of you guys know about this, but this happened many years ago when they launched this partnership. Right, the idea was to inject Macy's with a whole new branded platform, right? A whole new opportunity to be able to reach out and support emerging designers. But if you take a look at how that was executed or how poorly it was executed, what you'll see is, again, it's just another copy-paste of a catalog style format, right? You can't just take products and repurpose them and expect that to be a new customer experience. Your customers, guys, are not just looking for new products, they are looking for the vehicles by which they purchase them to be more intuitive, right? That is what I think is the most important thing we've got to take away from this. Now, again, Lord & Taylor partnering with Walmart, do we think it's gonna work? I don't know. I'm gonna say no. Just as much as I'm going to say that Amazon trying to be this high fashion company, or Amazon trying to break out and really get into that premium market, is also not something that's going to work. And why is that? I believe that there is way too much brand equity in the names Amazon, in the name Walmart, right? They never position themselves as being a premium player, right? They've been around way too long, and they've also really set a voice aside for themselves in the market as being these kind of lost leaders. What do you mean by a lost leader? Well, they make up for the discounts that they give by selling volume, right? In Amazon's case, they actually make up for it by doing advertising, right? So in the consumer's mind, they're not being positioned as these premium luxury spaces, right? That is one of the reasons why I think we're gonna see it to be a little bit more difficult to get the customer to convert. All right. Next cool thing that I think is coming out, Victoria Beckham is designing a collection for Reebok. I think that's really exciting. I don't know if you guys saw that Gary Vaynerchuk also just did a collaboration with Skechers. We're starting to see this as an interesting new trend. Gary Vaynerchuk being the first person that I know of that is not in the fashion space or sports world to be able to do a collaboration with a retail company. Isn't that weird? Isn't that kind of a different way of approaching it? I think it's incredible. And what I think is so amazing about that is when you start to pull in these different worlds, when you start to pull in these different kinds of products, these mashups, right? True mashups. What you're gonna find is more exposure to a wider audience. So whether or not those sneakers really have a huge sell-through, I'm not sure, right? That's going to remain market fit, right? Do people from K-Swiss really, care about Gary Vaynerchuk? Possibly, possibly not, right? But what I think is important for us to ask ourselves are, is this going to be something that we're going to see more of? As a fashion or retail company, will you guys now start to do some outreach and start to position and start working with leaders, with thought leaders, with entrepreneurs in totally different sectors and start to tap into their markets? I'm gonna say yes. I think that is an amazing new trend. One of the cool marketing strategies that came out of our office a few years ago, I was working with a brand that was launching direct-to-consumer women's workwear. And instead of just pitching influencers, one of the cool strategies we did was actually positioning and working with a lot of women leaders that are executives, right? And saying, hey, let's profile and work with people who actually have influence, right? People who actually have the ability to showcase and to tell a story and a narrative that hasn't been done before. So I think that's going to be a really interesting pivot as we start to look to, what is really an influencer, right? How do we actually leverage and work with influencers? So I think that's really fascinating. Okay, other interesting things that I want to share that I think is of worthy and of note. Number one is more of a local analysis. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the brand new Century City Mall that popped up in Los Angeles. Very exciting, a $1 billion project. What's fascinating, and if you guys are in Los Angeles, what you should definitely check out are the integrations with technology. The cohort planning, or how these guys are positioning a lot of the higher end stores next to a lot of higher end food services. That I think is really fascinating. The different kinds of brands that they've brought in to create experiential. And really, I think this new forefront planning of really thinking about lifestyle, right? So when we start to look at the future of malls, it's no longer going to be, hey, we're just selling here products and transactions. We are now looking at the future of lifestyle. So you might have asked yourself, why did Alibaba buy a mall, right? Why are people caring about malls? It's because malls have the opportunity to be able to give you a life experience. You can do your grocery shopping. You could go to the gym. You might be working out of a WeWork, right? You might also be going to a boutique health center in order to get your latest IV drip of vitamins, right? Or get some cryogenics done, right? I mean, the future of malls are going to become one-stop places for you to be able to experience that. So what does that mean as the retailer? Well, it means that more opportunities for data mining, data acquisition, more opportunities to do collaborations with retail developers and the real estate agents that you're working with in mall spaces. And guys, just as we are starting to see the decline of malls, I will urge you to start to take a look and see what new mall projects are on the horizon and who are the companies out there that are really doing cutting edge store layouts, that are using new technologies, and that are going to be the landmark representations of the future. All right, guys. final thoughts here, when it comes to, branding, when it comes to positioning, when it comes to growth drivers in the market, I want to reference another last article that came out of Business of Fashion. This is really profiling and highlighting the benefits of private label. Now, for those of you guys who have been thinking about private label, either on the retailer side or on the brand side, private label is really the ability to sell a product with your brand's name in it. A lot of brands will employ private label when it comes to producing t-shirts or some basic items. They'll buy that at a mass volume markup, and then they'll mark it up and they'll add their labels into it. So I think private label has always been around from the brand side. And then also we're seeing a lot of retailers go back to private label. Now, Macy's is one of the pioneers of private label, right? They have INC, they have Style & Co., they have Charter Club, and all these different private label businesses that they're managing and monitoring. Bloomingdale's has the same. We also look at companies like Marshall's, TJ Maxx, Ross. We see a lot of private label in some of these, more entry-level price point markets, right? More mass market appeal. However, when we think about, private label kind of moving into the aspirational market, which I think is really fascinating. We're seeing things like, Mr. Porter starting to do private label. We're also starting to see companies like Moda Operandi that are starting to actually launch cohorts of designer programs so they can eventually start to design for the private label. Now, one of the things that a lot of you guys, depending on how into the private label business, you're familiar with, back in 2007, 2008, when we started to see a huge rise of off-price markets, when we started to see the rise of Gilt Group, all the luxury stores starting to have, things in the Cabazon Mall, having things in Woodbury Commons. When we started to see that rise, we started to create, and that was really meant to liquidate product, we started to see that there was a huge need in order to fulfill this type of off-price market. So a lot of private label ended up going back into companies like Gilt Group, right? They started to produce a lot of private label. Companies like Gucci, Prada, Bottega, private label became a huge part of the luxury business and continues to be relatively not talked about, right? Because no one wants to expose the dirty little secret, if you will. But that percentage of the business is huge and it's thriving and it grows. Trust me, I know it. I used to be the buyer for the Gucci outlet division, right? I know all about the private label business. So I think it is really fascinating and really, really important to keep your eye on what it means in order to have a private label business. Now, Mr. Porter is going to be launching private label. I'm pretty sure we're going to start to see a lot of other major players be doing private label as well. If you are a brand and interested in doing private label, I highly suggest that you put together, in order to not cannibalize your own business, that you start to put together some strategic designs and assortment plans that you will use to then pitch to private label. Right, I think that's really important as well. And if you are a retailer, private label is certainly one of those amazing platforms that gives you huge high growth margins, right? You can start to really mark things up far more than you would if you were just buying wholesale. Now, usually what I like to do is recommend private label as an alternative option when you're looking to go into, what products already do well, you're looking to diversify your income, increase your project margins. But it's not something I would suggest doing right off the bat if you are a startup retail company. The reason why is, guys, you've got to understand what are the different opportunities. Now, when I say opportunity, that means what's the demand, what's the hole in the market. Companies like Mr. Porter certainly know what the holes in their market are because they have had a retail store online for quite some time. They know what people want, they know it's working, and this private label, guys, has the ability to cannibalize some of the other brands that they're carrying. Similarly, those of you guys who have products that are selling on Amazon, Amazon for a few years now has been launching private label shoes, different private label markets. That is based off of huge amounts of data, right? These guys know whether or not what's selling, what is selling, what are the key trigger points in order to purchase and to make that sale, so they can design directly into the consumer's needs. Anyway, guys, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for Retail Weekly. I'm so looking forward to continuing the conversation, reporting all the fun, new, exciting things happening in retail, sharing behind the scenes from our office, and most of all, giving you guys my thoughts and letting you know what I think is happening today and in the future. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.